Lonely rancher found a captive Apache girl in the desert, and he fought to give her a new life. The night over Red Mesa, flats burned like a furnace. Heat shimmered above the cracked earth, and every gust of wind carried the scent of iron and scorched grass. Liam Rourke was dousing the last sparks by the horse corral when he heard it, a sound too frail to belong to any beast. It came again. Faint, torn by the wind, the cry of a human breath breaking apart. He lifted his lantern and followed the dusty trail toward Coyote Bend, boots sinking into sand that still held the day's fire. Then the light caught something, a slumped figure beneath a dying yucca. A young Apache woman, skin scorched, wrists scored with rope. When he knelt, she startled, blade trembling in her hand, eyes wild with fever and fear. "Easy," Liam murmured, lowering the lantern. "No harm here." The knife slipped from her grasp. Before darkness claimed her, she whispered one word, "Sahale." Morning crept slowly across Red Mesa flats, painting the land in muted gold. The sun rose heavy and red, its light pooling over the scrub and yucca, over the cracked bed of Dry Willow Creek, now nothing more than a scar of dust through the valley. Liam Rourke stood at the cabin door, hat shadowing his eyes, a tin cup steaming in his hand. He'd built this cabin after leaving the cavalry, one room of pine boards and solitude. The war had given him a steady hand and a restless conscience. Both had aged him beyond his 35 years. Inside, the air smelled of boiled herbs and smoke. On the narrow cot, the woman he'd found still lay unmoving, a sheen of sweat over her temples. He had cleaned her cuts, loosened the rope burns at her wrists. He'd done so without words, as though afraid they might shatter the silence between them. By noon, she stirred. Her eyes flicked open, black and sharp like obsidian chips, darting from the unfamiliar ceiling to the stranger crouched by the fire. She tried to push herself up, winced, then froze when she saw the scar along his forearm, a pale, puckered mark that only soldiers carried. Liam caught the movement. He didn't hide the arm. He just said quietly, "Water's there." His voice was deep but calm, the tone of a man who'd long given up explaining himself. He rose, poured a ladleful of water into a tin cup, and set it near her hand. "You're safe here," he said after a moment. For now, the words did not comfort her. Her gaze swept the small room, the rifle leaning by the door, the saddlebags, the folded army coat tossed carelessly over a chair. Everything about him smelled of soldiers, of men who had burned her people's homes. She did not touch the cup. He didn't insist. He stepped outside to check the horses, leaving the door half open so the breeze could breathe through. Out on the flats, the cicadas had begun their midday chorus. Liam knelt by the trough, splashing water over his face, trying to wash away the memory that had come back the moment he saw her eyes too much like the ones he once saw behind the barrel of his own rifle. Inside the cabin, the woman sat up slowly. Her muscles trembled, but her instincts were alive. On the table beside the fire lay her small knife, cleaned and returned to its sheath. He had left it there. That puzzled her more than anything. No soldier would arm a captive. When he returned, she spoke for the first time, voice hoarse but firm. "Why help me?" He hesitated, meeting her eyes. "Because you were dying?" Then he turned back to his stew, ending the conversation as simply as he had begun it. That night, she didn't sleep. She listened to the faint sounds of him moving outside, the scrape of boots, the creak of saddle leather. He sat by the fire until dawn, his back to the cabin, as though guarding not her, but the fragile peace he'd made with himself. When morning came again, she finally lifted the cup of water he had left. It was warm, metallic, and tasted faintly of ash, but it was life. By the third morning, the fever had broken, leaving the woman pale but alert. She sat near the doorway, a wool blanket draped over her shoulders, watching the man who had rescued her repair a cracked saddle strap. His movements were measured, careful, deliberate, the way soldiers always were when they were trying not to think. "You never said your name," he murmured without looking up. She hesitated, eyes narrowing, Her lips parted as if to speak, but the words came slow, uncertain in English. Sahale. He nodded once. That means something, doesn't it? Her fingers tightened on the blanket. Sky. Fitting, he said quietly, cinching the strap. The sky doesn't belong to anyone. The faintest flicker crossed her face, suspicion, confusion, maybe something else, but it vanished quickly. Her gaze dropped to the scar on his left forearm, to the faint mark of a cavalry brand near his wrist. Her jaw set. You were with them. He didn't answer. The silence was enough. She rose abruptly, the blanket falling to the floor. You hunted us, she hissed. Men like you burned our lodges. He stood too, slowly, keeping his hands visible. I don't do that anymore. Then why the mark? She snapped, pointing at the scar. Why the coat, the rifle? Liam took a long breath, the words coming like gravel. Because war leaves stains that don't wash off easy. Her face hardened. She turned and stepped outside, into the harsh light of noon. The air shimmered around her, the desert stretching endless in every direction. He made no move to follow. Minutes passed, then an hour. The horizon rippled with heat, and wind began to lift the sand in small, stinging swirls. From where he stood, Liam could see her figure growing smaller, a fragile silhouette against the red earth. He felt the old instinct to call out, to stop her. But another instinct, older still, kept him silent. When night fell, he built a fire higher than usual, stacking it with mesquite wood until sparks hissed into the sky. On the porch, he laid a folded blanket, a tin of beans, and a knife hers, freshly sharpened. He waited until the coyotes began to sing before he went inside. Near midnight, he woke to the sound of the door creaking open. Bare feet brushed against the wooden floor. She stepped in quietly, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, and sat by the dying fire. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind moaned against the windows. The horses shifted restlessly in the corral. Finally, she said, her voice softer now. You could have stopped me. Liam turned toward her. Wouldn't have changed your mind. Her eyes met his, no longer burning with hatred, but with something more uncertain. You are not like them, he thought for a moment, then answered with quiet honesty. Maybe I was, but I'm trying not to be. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It felt like the first breath after a storm. She looked down at her hands, at the small cuts and scars that mapped her survival. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, then maybe we both are trying. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain from far away. And for the first time since she had come into his life, Liam Rourke felt the weight in his chest ease just a little. Days folded into one another beneath the relentless sun. The land around Dry Willow Creek stayed silent, except for the hiss of wind and the rustle of mesquite leaves. It was a hard place, a lonely one, but for the first time in years, Liam Rourke wasn't entirely alone. Sahale moved through the cabin like a wary ghost at first. She spoke little, watched everything. He learned not to crowd her, not to ask too much. Instead, they shared silence, the kind that grew lighter, not heavier, as the days passed. She mended the old shirt he'd torn at the sleeve, grinding her teeth at his awkward stitching before. He repaired her worn moccasins with a strip of saddle leather. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was something steady, like two strays learning each other's boundaries. In the evenings, when the heat eased, she would step outside to gather herbs near the dry creek bed. Liam would sometimes follow at a distance, leading the horse or carrying the lantern. Once, when a rattlesnake slid between the rocks, she reacted faster than him, snatching a branch. Striking, clean. He gave a low whistle, half in admiration. You move quiet, he said. She tilted her head slightly. Quiet keeps you alive. He smiled faintly. Guess I never learned that part. For the first time, she didn't turn away from his humor. Later, he found her sitting on a rock, grinding herbs with a flat stone. For fever, she said, and for guilt. Fever, I know. Liam murmured. The other, not so sure there's a cure. She didn't look up. Then maybe you carry it until it changes shape. Her words lingered longer than she could have guessed. That night, Liam lay awake, listening to the desert breath outside the low murmur of crickets, the far-off call of a coyote. He thought of the villages they'd burned, of the children who had vanished into smoke. He thought of her eyes, dark and alive, and wondered how she could look at him without seeing a monster. The next day, she found his Bible, its cover cracked, pages yellowed. You read these words, she asked. Sometimes, he said. When I can stand to, what do they mean? He hesitated, then sat beside her, reading slowly. The words sounded strange in his mouth after so long grace. Mercy. Forgiveness. She frowned, not understanding all of it, but something in her expression softened. Teach me the letters, she said quietly. He blinked, surprised. You sure? Sahale nodded. If I can read their words, maybe I can speak mine louder. So he began to teach her. Their lessons were clumsy but patient, his rough voice tracing the alphabet, her hands steady as she copied the shapes in the dirt. When she miswrote, he corrected gently. When he mispronounced one of her Apache words, she laughed for the first time. The sound startled them both. It was brief, bright, like rain on stone. By late summer, trust had grown between them, like stubborn green shoots in barren soil. He stopped locking the rifle away. She stopped sleeping with her knife in hand. Some evenings, she hummed soft melodies. He didn't know songs older than the trails he'd ridden. Once, she asked, "What did you fight for?" He stared at the horizon. They told us it was for peace, but it felt more like pride. She nodded slowly. And pride breaks more than it builds. Liam glanced at her then, realizing she spoke not only of him, but of her people too, of all the things lost between conquest and survival. That night, thunder rolled faintly beyond the mesas. They both stepped outside, watching the sky flicker. Rain, she whispered. Finally, the drops came slowly at first, tapping against the roof, then stronger, washing dust from the wooden walls. She raised her face to it, smiling faintly. Liam stood beside her, hat in hand, letting the water soak into his shirt. For a fleeting moment, neither past nor pain existed, only the smell of wet earth and the soft sound of rain on wood. When the storm passed, she turned to him and said, "Sky remembers who listens." He didn't know exactly what that meant, but he nodded. It felt true. Inside, as they dried near the fire, he found himself saying her name aloud, for the first time, not like a label, but like something fragile he wanted to keep safe. Sahale. She looked up, startled. In the wavering light, her eyes reflected the flame, and she answered simply, yes. It was a small word, but it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. Outside, the desert began to breathe again, somewhere. Water trickled faintly through the creek bed, as though the land itself was waking. The rain didn't last. Within a week, the ground cracked again, and the air grew thick with dust. But something in Liam had changed. He moved with purpose now, tending fences, gathering supplies, as if a new season were coming. Sahale noticed it too. She could feel a shift in him, the way he looked toward the horizon more often, the way his shoulders no longer slumped with the same old weariness. Yet peace in the desert was never meant to last. It came one noon, sharp as a rifle crack. 3 riders appeared from the south trail, dust pluming behind them, even before they drew close. Liam knew that gait, that arrogance in the way the lead horse cut through the wind. Silas Crow. Liam stood on the porch, rifle leaning against the post. Sahale froze in the doorway, face pale beneath the sunburn. Crow reined in, grinning, teeth flashing white against the grime. Well, I'll be damned. Liam Rourke, the ghost himself. Liam's hand stayed at his side. You've got no business here. On the contrary, Crow said, swinging off his horse. He held up a folded paper, its seal cracked and dusty. This here's government property you're hiding. An Apache slave escaped from my custody. See the mark stamped legal in Tucson. He tossed the paper at Liam's boots. Girl like that's worth more than your land. Sahel's breath caught, but she didn't move. Liam's jaw tightened. She's no one's property. Crow laughed. That's rich. Coming from a man who once dragged them out by the dozens. Don't think I forgot what we did down by San Carlos. You and I. We made a fine living off that dust. The words hit harder than the heat. Liam felt the shame rise. The memory clawing back the raids, the orders, the screams. Those days are done. Maybe for you, Crow sneered. But business is business. Hand her over. Rourke, don't make this ugly. He took a step forward. And in that single heartbeat, Liam moved. The rifle came up one motion, clean and sure, and the report cracked across the flats. The bullet split the sand inches from Crow's boot. Crow flinched, eyes wide for the first time. Liam's voice was steady, cold. Next one won't miss. The silence that followed seemed to swallow the world. Then Crow spat into the dust. You've made your choice. He swung back onto his horse. You can't hide forever, soldier. When the riders disappeared beyond the ridge, Sahale stepped out slowly. They will come back. I know. He began packing water, ammo, dry rations. Every movement was precise, practiced. She watched him, realizing he'd always been waiting for this, the moment when his past would come knocking. That night, they left Dry Willow Creek behind. The horses carried them through narrow canyons, across black stone ridges under a waxing moon. By dawn, they reached the mouth of Black River Canyon, a place Liam knew from the war, where the cliffs hid more secrets than graves. They built a small camp beneath the overhang, far from the trails. The river below whispered weakly against the rocks, its voice like wind through bone. For a while, it seemed safe. They hunted rabbits, gathered roots Sahale recognized, and shared quiet meals by the fire. But safety in such a place was fragile. One evening, while setting traps near the river, Liam slipped on the wet stones. A jagged branch tore into his shoulder, not deep, but enough to fester. By nightfall, fever took hold. He tried to mask it, but by the second day, he was delirious, muttering half-coherent words from old battles. Sahala sat beside him, eyes glistening in the firelight. Hush, she whispered, pressing a cool cloth to his brow. No spirits will take you. Outside, thunder rolled again faint, then closer. She gathered sage and dried herbs, crushed them, burned them in a clay bowl. The smoke rose in pale ribbons, carrying the scent of home. Then she sang a low, trembling song. Words from her mother's tongue, a song to call the rain. All night she sang. When dawn broke, the sky opened. Rain poured down the canyon walls, washing away dust and ash, drenching the parched earth. Liam stirred, breath deepening. His fever broke under the touch of the storm. When he finally woke, the world smelled of wet stone and life. Sahale sat by his side, hair damp, exhaustion in her eyes. You brought the rain, he murmured, voice hoarse. She smiled faintly. No, you just stopped fighting it. He tried to speak, but she shook her head, pressing a finger to his lips. Sleep, the sky listens when hearts do. Outside, the river swelled, filling its old channels again. And for the first time in years, Dry Willow Creek flowed, even if only in his dreams. When the fever finally left him, the canyon had already changed. The river now whispered through the rocks, silver under the morning sun, and the air smelled of damp earth and sage. Liam sat propped against a boulder, a blanket over his shoulders, weak but alive. Sahale was kneeling by the fire, drying strips of rabbit meat, humming under her breath. He watched her quietly for a while. The way her hands moved, careful, precise, reminded him of the nurses who used to patch soldiers together. But there was something else in her motions, grace, patience, a rhythm born of living close to the land. You stayed, he said finally, voice still rough. She didn't look up. Where else would I go? He gave a faint smile. Away from me. From what I was. At that, she lifted her gaze. You are not what you were. If you were, I'd be dead. Her words struck deeper than any bullet could. He looked away, ashamed. But she didn't let him retreat. The men who did those things, they were not alone. She continued softly. Our people have ghosts, too. Anger, revenge, pride. All carve the same scars. He stared into the fire, hearing the distant drip of rainwater from the cliffs. You talk like forgiveness is easy. No, she said, forgiveness is heavy. That's why we share it. For a long while, neither spoke. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Then Sahale reached into her satchel and pulled out the small, battered Bible he'd once used to teach her the alphabet. She set it gently in his lap. You read to me, she said. Now I read to you. Her finger traced the lines, slow but steady. Her English still broken, but certain. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Liam's throat tightened. That's one I used to skip, he admitted. She smiled faintly. Then maybe now you can keep it. Later, when the light faded, they sat side by the fire. The silence between them had changed again, not distance, but rest. She reached over, touching the bandage on his shoulder. No more running. He met her eyes. No more running. 2 days later, they broke camp. The fever had left him leaner, slower, but clearer. Together they rode north toward Silverdale, the nearest town, to buy medicine and a fresh horse. The valley opened before them, green veins already threading through the red earth where the rain had fallen. But peace has its price. As they entered Silverdale, conversation fell away. People stopped what they were doing, men with shovels, women with baskets all turning to stare. An Apache woman beside a white man was not a sight they welcomed. Murmurs rippled through the dusty street. Liam felt every eye like a weight. He could have lied, said she was a servant or a guide. But when the deputy approached, hand resting on his holster, Liam stepped forward before Sahale could speak. She's with me, he said evenly, and she's free. The deputy sneered. That's not what the papers say. From behind them came the voice of Ellen Ward, the gray-haired innkeeper. That's not what I say, she cut in sharply, stepping down from her porch. That girl saved my life near Gila last spring. Fever near took me, and she brought the herbs that pulled me through. If any of you doubt her worth, you can answer to me. The tension broke like a held breath. The deputy looked uncertain, spat into the dust, then stepped back. Liam nodded to Ellen. Much obliged. Ma'am. Ellen smiled, eyes twinkling. Good men don't come easy in this country. Mr. Rourke, best hold on to what you found. They left Silverdale at dusk, the sun bleeding into the mesas. Behind them, the whispers faded with the wind. On the trail, Sahale glanced back once. They will not stop talking. Let them, Liam said. They'll forget before long. She shook her head, smiling. Then we will remind them that the world can change. He looked at her, really looked, the dusk painting her face in warm gold, the wind lifting her hair. You already did. The road ahead curved toward the Gila River, shimmering faintly under the dying light. For the first time in years, Liam felt the pull of something larger than guilt-hope, quiet and real. They rode through the night, guided by the pale wash of moonlight over the desert. The road twisted between dark mesas and wide basins, where shadows pooled like water. Ahead lay the river country, the wild edge of Arizona territory, where no one asked questions and few remembered names. By dawn, they reached the bend of Coyote Ridge. The air smelled of mesquite and gun oil. Liam felt the hairs rise on his neck before he saw them, 3 silhouettes breaking from the rocks ahead. Crow, he muttered. Sahale's hand went instinctively to her bow. Crow and his men rode out slow, their horses snorting clouds in the cool morning air. You thought you could outrun me, Crow called. Ain't nowhere left to hide. Rourke, you had your chance to hand her over. Liam dismounted, boots sinking into the sand. And you had yours to walk away. Crow laughed, a low, dry sound that didn't reach his eyes. Always the soldier, always thinking you get to choose who lives. He raised his revolver. Let's finish this. The first shot split the silence, echoing off the canyon walls. The horses reared, dust flew. Liam rolled behind a boulder, returning fire. Bullets tore the air, sparks biting into stone. Sal ducked low, drawing her bow from her saddle. Her first arrow found the shoulder of Crow's right-hand man. The second, cleaner and faster, sent another rider's hat spinning into the dirt. "Get down!" Liam shouted. But she was already moving, circling wide through the scrub. Crow, cursing, turned his gun toward her. Liam stepped out of cover at that instant, firing once. Twice the second shot hitting Crow's horse in the flank. The animal screamed, rearing high before collapsing. Crow hit the ground hard, his weapon spinning into the sand. He looked up, dazed, bleeding from the temple, and saw Liam standing over him. "You could kill me," Crow rasped. "Like you killed them all before." Liam's finger tightened on the trigger. For a heartbeat, the old rage, the soldier's reflex flared hot and sure. Then Sahali's voice cut through it. "Enough." "Liam." He turned. She was standing a few paces away, bow lowered, eyes steady. No more ghosts. The wind gusted through the canyon, scattering the dust between them. Slowly, Liam lowered the gun. "Go," he told Crow. "If I see you again, it ends different." Crow staggered to his horse, clutching his side. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but his voice was hollow now. He rode away, disappearing into the glare of the desert. When the silence returned, it was heavy but clean like air after a storm. Liam sank to his knees, breath ragged. Sahali came to him, pressing a hand to his shoulder. "It's done," she said softly. He nodded, though his hands still trembled. "You saved me again." "No," she whispered. "You saved yourself." They buried the spent shells in the sand, erasing the last trace of violence, and rode west until the sky deepened into violet. By nightfall, they reached Gila Crossing, a place of pale dunes and quiet water. There, on a small rise above the river, they built a shelter of cedar and mud brick. Days passed in the rhythm of small things fetching water, tending fire, sowing corn seeds Sahali had carried in a pouch. The sound of the river replaced the echo of gunfire. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Liam stood by the river with his old rifle in hand. The metal was pitted, the stock worn smooth by years of use. He looked at it for a long time, then began to dig. Sahali watched from a few paces away. "You don't need to," she said gently. "I do," he replied. He lowered the rifle into the earth, covering it with sand. "If I keep it, I'll keep finding reasons to use it." She knelt beside him, pressing her palm flat over the mound. "The land will keep it quiet. Let it rust into the soil." He looked at her. The glow of sunset caught in her hair. "You think the land can forgive," she smiled faintly. "The land forgets nothing, but it teaches you to live with what it remembers." He nodded, his voice low. And you, Sahali, turned toward the horizon, where the sky met the red earth. "I will stay," she said simply. "Here, the wind speaks softer. Maybe one day. It will carry our names kindly." Liam reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. That night, under a field of quiet stars, they sat before their small fire. The scent of sage drifted on the air, the sound of water lapping nearby. For the first time, the silence between them was peace, not exile. Weeks later, the first shoots of corn broke through the soil thin, green, stubborn. The rains returned, filling the creek that wound past their cabin. Dry Willow Creek was no longer dry. People in Red Mesa would later whisper about the soldier who vanished and the Apache girl who went with him. Some said they died. Others said they built a home where the river met the sky. But out on the flats, if you listened close, you could hear the water running and a woman's voice, soft as wind. The sky remembers who listens, and beside her, a man who once carried too many ghosts learned that mercy, like water, always finds its way back to the earth. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that even in the harshest lands, kindness can still take root, then stay with us. Here, we tell the tales of the Old West, not just with gunfire, but with heart of soldiers who found redemption, of women who taught the desert to forgive, of strangers who built peace from silence. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of love, mercy, and the untamed frontier. Because somewhere beyond the dust, every soul still deserves a second chance.